Alright, this is video 2 for American history. We just talked about Guantanamo Bay. Now we're going to be talking about Hurricane Katrina. After Bush won his re-election in 2004 because of his support for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, he has another major crisis, and what a lot of people criticize him for, especially around here, is Hurricane Katrina. In August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. As we know from Louisiana, people are always told to get out, but they didn't, because we always feel like we can make it through a hurricane. So it hit, and it seemed like for most of the day on that Sunday that things were going to work out fine. It was going to be like a normal hurricane, but then that afternoon, when it hit, it broke the levees, which was the big disaster we always thought might happen. So the levees broke after the storm hits, and resulted in over 80% of New Orleans flooding. So over 80% of New Orleans flooded as a result of the levees breaking, because New Orleans sits in this bowl elevation-wise, and the water stood there for weeks. So the water didn't only flood, but it also just stood there for a long time. It wasn't pumped for quite a long period. This creates a lot of terrible property damage, not just in New Orleans, but also throughout the Gulf Coast. That's one thing often gets forgotten about Katrina, that it doesn't just affect the city of New Orleans. It also affects New Orleans, other parts of Louisiana, affects Mississippi, Alabama, all on the Gulf line. It results in a lot of disasters. But most of the focus was on New Orleans because you have people trapped in their houses. Some people died there. You have hundreds of people who die because of Katrina because they didn't leave and so forth, or couldn't leave, or whatever the case was. So this was at the time, considered to be one of the worst engineering disasters of all time, if not the worst. Because the levees broke, they said there was lawsuits eventually against the U.S. Army of Engineers because they felt like they didn't do a good job inspecting the levees and so forth. So it was just a big disaster. It led to a lot of people being very upset, and people hurt, losing their properties and so forth. People when they left, they went all over. They went to Baton Rouge, they went to Texas, they went to Georgia. People went all over the places for Katrina. Some were still there, some came back to New Orleans. It all just depends on who they were and so on. But it's important to remember about Katrina is that this was considered to be a failure at all levels of government. It was considered to be a failure at the local level, the mayor, Ray Nagin, those guys. The state level, at that time, our governor was Governor Kathleen Blanco. It was considered to be a failure on her part because she didn't do enough to try to prevent or get people evacuated out ahead of time and ask for federal assistance soon enough, ask for help from Bush and so forth. And of course, a lot of blame goes to Bush and his administration too. So every level, local, city, and state, and federal, all are blamed for the problems of Hurricane Katrina. So Bush was criticized. He does take blame for this because he's the president, although it wasn't 100% his fault. FEMA is also the organization that's supposed to deal with emergencies. FEMA also doesn't have a good leadership as far as how to deal with them. So FEMA's also hurt. FEMA also doesn't do a great job, and they're also criticized for what they do in Hurricane Katrina. But from what you've seen, probably, is that we're still, for the most part, a lot of New Orleans has been rebuilt and things are kind of back to normal, but there's still a lot of areas that are not, and areas you can see that are still affected by the storm and so forth. But maybe one day it'll all return to normal. But we're still feeling the effects today, and the people who are here now, who left, and all these different aspects. But just be aware that it was highly criticized for the government. It was it made Bush look terrible and so forth, but it hurt his presidency and his reputation. And finally, for Bush, in his last year in office, he has a 2008 mortgage crisis. So in 2008, you have this big, giant recession that results from mortgages and so forth, from houses, and it hurts banks and hurts Americans. And that's one of the reasons why you see like Obama and the Democrats win the elections in 2008, because it seemed like the Republicans didn't know what was going on with the economy. So I'll try to explain this as concise as I can. I don't want to make this overly complicated, but there was a big real estate boom in the 1990s and early 2000s. The government had removed a lot of restrictions on getting loans for your house. Basically, you could go to a bank in the early 2000s, get a home for no money down. So basically, you had to put no money down, you get a house, and the problem was people were getting houses, these mortgages, for like a $400,000 house when all they could really afford was like maybe a $150,000 house, because you weren't putting any money down. And so because they removed these restrictions, people were getting these loans and stuff on their houses, these mortgages, in the early 2000s, getting way bigger houses than what they actually could afford. because of the relaxation of these different laws that took place in the 90s and later on in 2000s. So anyway, what hurt these people was that their interest rate when they got their mortgage was adjustable. So whatever the interest rate may have started out as, it got bigger. So their payments for their houses got bigger. And so as time goes on, when they couldn't really afford a $400,000 house in the first place, they start making payments on it. The interest rates go up, which means they're making bigger payments, and so eventually they have to foreclose because they can't afford it. So all of a sudden, around 2008, you have all these homes start to foreclose, and it starts to hurt the bank. The banks that were giving the money start to get hurt because they're losing money because of all these foreclosures, because those people couldn't afford the houses. Now the banks aren't getting their money back, which means that they're going to take a hit too. And so you're seeing banks start to go up in the 2008. You're seeing businesses start to get hurt because of these investments that people had been making and so forth. Property values go down in 2008. There was a mortgage crisis as a result of all this. Investments in the country started to slow. Businesses stopped hiring. Sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting. Stopped hiring as many people. Spending declined as a result of all this. And so just in general, this whole mortgage crisis and this housing crisis made the whole economy go into a recession. So by the end of 2008, a lot of businesses are struggling in America because of people laying off people and the recession and so forth. Unemployment gets as high as 10%. So things are getting somewhat rough, which makes Bush and the Republicans look bad. But before Bush leaves office, he and the Democratic Congress, because Congress at that point had become Democratic, passed this bailout money. Some of the corporations they felt like were too big to fail, and they needed to bail them out. So some, even like car companies, for example, like Ford didn't take a bailout money, but GM and Chrysler did. So the government gives these loans called bailout money, or TARP money, spelled T-A-R-P. That's the acronym. So they gave bailout money or TARP money to big corporations, like these big banks or these big corporations like GM or whatever, so they wouldn't fail. Since then, all the bailouts money has been paid back, but some people felt like those companies shouldn't have been saved. If they were going to fail, they should have failed because the regular guys who got fired, they lost maybe all their money in savings, their money in their stock market. They lost their jobs. So a lot of people did get hurt by the recession. But the people at the top who got bailed out by the government, people who were operating these companies, didn't lose their job and still got to be paid a lot of money, got to keep their money and so forth, and they felt like that was unfair. But if Bush and Congress didn't do this, the economy would probably have been worse if these various businesses would have failed because it means people would have lost their jobs. So for the most part, Bush and Congress probably did what they should have done with trying to help some companies out, even though it does help out the wealthy as a result. They could probably have done more to help out the people who were suffering, the lower classes, but at least big-wise, this was probably the right move. But that's one of the final things that makes Bush look bad when he leaves office. And then we go in now to Barack Obama. So I don't have a slide, but this will be a change of slide to Barack Obama. And this is where you're not going to know a ton of information, but we're going to go through his information pretty quickly here. In 2008, Obama becomes a surprise candidate over Hillary Clinton. People thought Hillary Clinton would become the candidate in 2008, like they think it is now, but he eventually wins out the nomination over her in 2008. He led a very masterful campaign. He was a great speaker, very charismatic, and knew how to communicate with people. He's also the first African American to win a major party nomination and, of course, become the first African American president as well. So he's also the first major party African American nominee, but also the first black president, too. It didn't look good for Republicans in 2008 because you had the issues with the recession that year. You had the issues with Afghanistan and Iraq. They're still going on at this point. It didn't make the Republicans look good. And so the guy who ran against Obama, John McCain, couldn't separate himself enough from George Bush, and so people felt like if they voted a Republican in, it would be 4 more years of George Bush. Sorry, I'm pouring myself a little bit of water here. So Obama wins as a result and wins outright. What you need to be aware of, though, in this election, and this is the case now too, is that Obama pulls in these different groups to help him get elected too that are not necessarily always been voting. He uses a lot of social media to get elected, so he's one of these first major candidates to use Facebook, to use Twitter, where the social accounts were active, maybe Instagram, those kind of things back then. But he's one of the first presidents to actively use a lot of social media to help get elected. By doing that, he targets a lot of young people, so people who helped elect Obama were a lot of young people. He also gets a lot of minorities. He gets the African American vote. He also gets a lot of like Latino vote whenever he runs for office. So these minorities, working class people, the young people, are these groups that he gets to vote for him. And social media had a big part of that. Using phones and using internet, using Twitter and MySpace, all these different things. All that helped him get elected in 2008. So he gets elected. So to address the economy, because again we're in the recession at this point, in 2009 he creates what he calls a stimulus package. So he and Congress creates what's called a stimulus package. It's called a stimulus package. What this was supposed to do is basically just give a lot of federal dollars to people. Everybody would get some money from the federal government, and the idea was they would take this money, they would go out into the economy, and they would spend it. And that was the whole idea behind this stimulus package. And that would help make the economy get better and get us out of this recession. The idea was that it would help increase production, it would help increase spending, it would help create more employment, make the economy functional again. That was the idea. It did provide some immediate relief. People got money, it helped them buy some stuff. But long term, it didn't help because it wasn't enough for like long term growth. It was helpful for immediate, but once that money was gone, it was gone. Plus, a lot of people, what also was bad was people didn't always spend the money, so they kept the money, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take that money and spend it, thus helping the economy out. But when that didn't happen, things don't really improve. So things get better a little bit, but over long term, the package didn't really do what it was supposed to do. Because businesses also thought that the Bush tax cuts went in. We talked about the Bush tax cuts a while back. People thought Obama was going to get rid of the Bush tax cuts, so businesses thought their taxes would go up. So they didn't want to hire anybody new, because if they hired somebody new, they couldn't afford it. So it didn't lead to more employment either, is my point. So long story short, the stimulus package was where the government was supposed to give federal dollars to people to help make the economy get better. It kind of worked, but long term really didn't, because all it did was, it didn't provide enough funding. Number one, number two, it did put us more in debt. So it's an example of deficit spending, and it puts us deeper into debt because that money wasn't going to be paid back. It wasn't a loan. It was just like, here, have this money, go use it. Okay. Next big thing is the health care passage in 2010. So Obama finally passes a government style of health care reform. Truman had tried this, JFK, LBJ, Carter, Clinton, all had tried to pass these health care changes, and it doesn't work. And so Obama finally is able to has a Democratic Congress, and in 2010 he's finally able to pass this health care insurance reform called Obamacare. Well, we call it Obamacare, but it creates this government supported health care insurance program. So supporters thought it would help people who didn't have health care insurance. Like we said, not everybody has health care insurance, so it would help those who don't have it, number one. But critics said it would be unaffordable because it would raise taxes, people would pay more out of their pocket, and people also said it would diminish the quality of health care. Despite people criticizing it, it still passed through Congress in 2010. So it still passed no matter what. In 2010, we still have it today. Although people in Congress are trying to get rid of it. Something that's unconstitutional, but it's since has gone on to the Supreme Court a few times, and it's been every time it's been protected. Now, Obama originally said it wasn't a tax, but the Supreme Court said to be considered to be considered constitutional, this health care policy is considered a tax. So essentially it is a tax, and it does make people pay more out of their paychecks to provide health care for people. So what the deal is and what this provides, so we're all clear. Like if I have a job like a teacher, I get health care through my job, so I don't have to worry about getting it elsewhere. So the health care I have is through my job. Well, some jobs don't provide health care. And so to force everyone to get health care, the government requires you to get it. So every year you have to prove you have health care. That's a requirement now. Or you have to pay a fine whenever you pay your taxes. So if you don't get health care, you got to pay a penalty fine whenever you pay your taxes. So for those who don't get it from their job, they now can go on the government website, this healthcare.gov website, and apply for health care. And there's all kinds of options, very cheap option, very expensive option, and so forth. But the point is that the government helps you out for those what you can't pay for and so forth, and that creates a government, funded, government controlled and so forth, sponsored health care, which means that companies and so forth have to charge higher premiums, which means that Now, whenever I pay my taxes from every check, the amount of taxes I pay go up because it's covering these health insurance costs now. But anyway, Obamacare, or the health care, is still around today. There was some issues when it first got rolled out, but now it's working for the most part. But this does, and this is something important to note too, since it was very controversial, it does lead to Republicans taking over office in Congress in 2010 down the road, which brings us to the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street movement. So because of the recession, because of Obama and some of the things he did and didn't do, you get two protest movements that form in 2010, 2011. So the first one is the Tea Party group. Actually, Tea Party was 2009, not 2010, but Tea Party was 2010. I'm sorry, Tea Party was 2009. It's late, sorry. So because of the stimulus package people didn't like, because it felt like it was a waste of money, and because of the Obamacare platform, you get this conservative Republican group forms called the Tea Party. So not all Republicans are Tea Party people, but the extremist conservatives join what's called the Tea Party movement, which they want to see the government become a lot smaller. They want to get control of federal spending, and they want to restore some of the liberties they feel like Obama and his administration are oppressing. The Tea Party became so influential that it helped Republicans win the House of Representatives in 2010. So in the midterm elections in 2010, Obama and the Democrats lose control of the House to Republicans. And ever since then, the Republicans have held control over the House, which means that Obama's had a hard time getting anything passed because of their different ideologies. But because people got upset with Obamacare and how it rolled out, because they got upset with Obama with some of the way he was doing the spending, and because the economy wasn't getting better overnight, it led to Republicans getting into office in 2010, in the House at least. And now they're even more influential. The Tea Party still has influence. Now the Tea Party has influence in the House and Senate. Republicans have since gotten power in the House and the Senate. And today you're still seeing the effects of Tea Party, and that's still going on right now too. The other protest group is called the Occupy Wall Street movement, which has since ended. But in 2011, there was a liberal or a leftist protest movement called the Occupy Wall Street movement, where a lot of students, low-income people, went to Wall Street, New York, and other places and protested American greed, essentially. They were protesting corporate greed, companies companies who deal with Wall Street and Wall Street itself. They were protesting inequality in America. They were protesting the inability of the federal government to relieve the suffering. Unemployment was still high. This is where you get the whole 1% versus the 99% of the if you ever heard that. But basically, this Occupy Wall Street movement that forms in 2011 was not against Obama or government, but it was against how the government doesn't do anything to try to stop these big corporations from getting all this money. And that's one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders is so popular right now, is that Bernie Sanders is trying to make the government more responsible for that in various ways. But people were upset that all these big companies CEOs had millions or billions of dollars, and their workers weren't getting paid as much as they were. Plus, in that same time period, governments were cutting funding to education, which upset people. So, like, a lot of these kids are college kids, so they don't like the idea that the government's cutting funding for education. Social services were being reduced that year. There was high student debt people were having to deal with, so they wanted the government to do more to help provide for college assistance, or even free colleges, or whatever the case was, and that's what they were protesting. That movement died out over time, although there's still legacy still around. Like Bernie Sanders is part of that now, but the Occupy Wall Street itself, unlike Tea Party, was still around. Occupy Wall Street has basically since gone away, but those ideas of like government doing more for education, more for social services is still out there. Okay. On your outline, I had the death of Osama bin Laden. All you know is that finally in 2011, we find him in Pakistan, we kill him. So we finally kill the leader of Al-Qaeda, the guy who coordinated the 9/11 attacks in 2011 in May. We find Osama bin Laden and we kill him. Or at least the Navy SEALs do. Finally, I don't have the outline that you have in front of me, but this is where we're going to wrap up the notes. I have the Middle Eastern uprisings. I think I have something on there about the 2012 elections. Don't worry about it. Basically, wherever I stop this video is where we're gonna stop the notes. There is some more stuff on your notes about computers and AIDS research and cancer research, all that. I will cover that later on, so I will not test you on that on Wednesday. So everybody's clear. We're going to stop here with this Middle Eastern uprising stuff, and that's basically it. We're not going to go beyond that point. If there's anything else I neglect on the outline, we'll cover it after the test later. But from this point onward, I'm going to do this. The Middle Eastern stuff will be on the test. After that, we'll work with the rest later on. And this is a foreign policy thing that happens in 2011. You have this Arab Spring pop up in 2011. A lot of Arab countries in 2011 decided they wanted to try to protest for democracies. Nothing to really do with us, but we do get involved in some situations here. Egypt, Liberia, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Jordan, Saudi Arabia all start pushing for democratic reform. You don't need to know all those countries, but they all start pushing for democratic reforms in 2011. One is Egypt. Egypt had a lot of anti-government protests. The people wanted to have more democracy. The president they had in charge of Egypt was in power for 30 years. He was a president, but really like a dictator. So they got rid of the president was forced to resign because of all the protests. And then that made us worried because Egypt had always been this very stable government for 30 years since the whole Camp David Accords. So if Egypt could fall to these protests of trying to make reforms and so forth, the revolution, we worry that it might happen in a lot of different countries, or it may make the Middle East even more unsettled and so forth. So losing Egypt made us worried about the region, and we're still dealing with some of that breakdown today too, because Egypt is still very much in flux. The other country we want to worry about is Libya. The longtime dictator of Libya, a guy named Muammar Gaddafi, you don't even know that, but the longtime leader of Libya was Muammar Gaddafi. He was forced to be removed from power. He tried to crack down rebels, and we do kind of get involved here. The United Nations gets involved to take him out of power. We do airstrikes. The United Nations does some airstrike stuff too. So we do help Libya get rid of their leader, but there's still a lot of instability there too, and we're still trying to work on that now. But that hasn't gotten any better. So the Arab Spring, which is great, people, the idea is great. At least people trying to make democracies, but at the same time, people trying to take advantage of the revolutions, and so as a result, there's still a lot of instability in the Middle East because of all that. So I'm not worried about the 2012 elections. I'm not worried about all the cancer, AIDS research, all that stuff. We'll cover that later on. But we'll recover from Carter to Obama. That's it. So this is the end of the notes for that. Tomorrow's work keys. Have fun with that, and then I will see you. I'll see you hopefully later this week. So be good.